Hi everyone, and welcome to the FrenchEntrée YouTube channel. In this webinar, we were joined by Eleanor from International Immigration Lawyers Lexidy, who talked us through the different visa options for moving to France. Helen from insurance specialist AXA International, who gave a comprehensive introduction to the French healthcare system, and FrenchEntrée property and relocation advisor Debbie, who filled us in on taxes, social taxes, and pensions for French residents. Be sure to stay until the end to see our viewers' questions answered. And if you have any extra questions, let us know in the comments and we will get our experts to answer them for you. Finally, don't forget to subscribe and tick the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Right, let's get to it. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the latest of our FrenchEntrée webinars. My name is Zoe Smith. I'm digital editor of FrenchEntrée. For those of you that aren't familiar with FrenchEntrée, we are part of the France Media Group, and we've been a leading resource for French property buyers and expats for more than 20 years now. We provide a host of free resources, including weekly newsletters and French property listings over at FrenchEntrée.com, as well as putting out regular video content on our YouTube channel. We also have the FrenchEntrée members service, which provides extra help and guidance during your journey of buying property and moving to France. We have 2 levels of membership: Essential, which allows access to our exclusive members content and everything you need for your property buying journey, and our Plus membership, in which you'll have personal guidance from our property and relocation advisors. And if you want to find out more or you're ready to become a member, then you can do that at FrenchEntrée.com/members. We'll also pop that link in the chat box for you. Right, let's get started with today's webinar, where we're going to cover all the basics of moving to France. We're going to focus on our UK audience this time, but much of the information today will be relevant to other nationalities, and we will also be hosting a similar webinar focusing on our American and Canadian audiences soon, so keep an eye out for that. We're aiming for a runtime of around 1 hour today, and each of our speakers are going to give a short presentation, after which I will put some of your questions to them. So if I could ask you all to please turn your cameras on now. Thank you all for joining me today. So first up today will be Eleanor from Lexidy, who are international immigration lawyers, and she'll be talking you through the different visa options available for moving to France. Next up, we'll have Helen from AXA International, who'll be giving you all the need-to-know information about the French healthcare system. And last but not least, we'll have Debbie, who is our FrenchEntrée property and relocation advisor. And today she's going to be focusing on her main area of expertise, which is French taxes. So it's about time I stopped talking. So we'll go straight over to our first speaker, which is French immigration lawyer Eleanor from Lexidy. Over to you, Eleanor.
Thank you very much, Zoe, for this introduction. So hello, everyone. I'm Eleanor. I'm a French registered attorney. I'm specialized in immigrations and relocation to France. And I work with Lexidy. We are a legal tech law firm specialized in immigration and present in many different European countries, among which you have Italy, Portugal, Spain, Greece, and even Mexico from this year. And we aim to provide a comprehensive support on your relocation journey. We try to be a one-stop shop as much as possible and help from the visa applications to healthcare registration or even exchanging your foreign driving license. So let's start with the topic of today. I wanted to give you some ideas and some content regarding the different visas that we have to live and work in France. So there are many different type of visas when you want to come to France. But I'm trying to simplify it as much as possible and make it easy for you without all the boring legal blah blah. So I will break them down into different categories. So you have either the private visa or the working visa. So let's start with the private stay visas. So if you're lucky enough, you might have a French spouse or a European spouse. in your family or European children, and this will make things much easier. You won't even have to apply for a long stay visa. You can come to France using your British or American passport, for instance, and apply directly from France in the French prefectures. But what about the others that do not have European relatives? Well, I have to mention the long stay visitor visa because it's our best selling product. Because it's quite easy to meet the requirements. So basically, we have three main conditions. You need to have medical coverage, and I will leave this to Helen. Later on, you need to show that you have enough income to support your stay in France, income or funds, which are acceptable as well, and that you're not going to be working in France. So as long as you have those three conditions that are quite easy to meet, you can apply for the long stay visitor visa. That is a 1-year visa. You can renew it on a yearly basis. And after 5 years, you can even get a 10-year residency permit. So it's definitely a very good and straightforward option to move to France. Then we have all the family visas. I highlighted a few of them, but I also wanted to speak about the family of talent visa. You will see I'm going to speak about it later on. It's a special category of visas that allow the family of the holder of the talent residency permits to have facilities in order to apply for their visas. So it's definitely worth mentioning. So let's have a look at the working visas. Here, I also like to simplify it on whether you are going to work as a freelancer, so you're working for yourself, or as an employee for an employer. For the freelancers, we have the entrepreneur visas. So basically, the main thing that you need to remember is that you have to provide a business plan explaining a little bit what you do, what kind of clients you will have, how much you think you will invoice from France. Nothing complicated, and you don't even need to have already an existing business. It's just a project. If you give me the visa, this is what I am planning to do. Once we have gathered these elements, we have to submit it to a special French administration that gives an opinion on the project. And once we have the opinion, then we can apply for the visa. This is for the entrepreneur. The employees is more or less the same, meaning that you will need to apply for authorization. But it's obviously it's a bit different because it's your employer that will need to support you, to sponsor you, to explain that he's willing to work with you and get this authorization before you are able to apply for the long stay visa. And then I put at the bottom the talent visa, which is a really special category. It's a big family where you have a lot of different categories of visas. And I like to call them a premium visas. Why? For two things mainly. The first one is that you can have more quickly a pluriannual residency permit up to 5 years. I do have some clients that applied and right away they had a 5-year residency permit, and it's easier for your family to move to France. They can apply as family of talent visa holders, and it's easier for them. And so, who can apply for the talent visas? It can be freelancers, company owners, artists. Highly skilled workers that do not have to apply for the working authorization, depending on how much you earn and what are your skills. You can skip this condition too. So yeah, it's good to know that it exists. Yes, here I put for who are these working visa categories. So the entrepreneurs, the employees. It can be either a French or an international company, and the talent visas for founders, highly skilled people, artists, etc., etc. So I wanted to give a few tips for the preparation of the visa application. Well, in France, we are very administrative. Maybe you already know that, but if not, get prepared. We like papers, we like forms, we like documents. So The consulates and the French prefecture, they like to see things prepared in a certain way. They like to see the little box ticked, and you need to be very careful with how you present the application and what documents are needed, because we spotted on many consulates websites, even the French consulate in the UK, that they do not put the full list of documents needed for certain visa types. For instance, the entrepreneur visas that are a bit more complex to prepare. So it's really important to have solid information before, because otherwise you can waste a lot of time. People that don't apply for the working authorization or things like this. This is more for the working people, but for the visitor, I see a lot of issues as well, of people being granted short-term visitor visas. And this is also something that you can get prepared ahead. When you fill in all the forms and you prepare your application, because if you have less than 1 year, or if it's not renewable, then you have to start all the process all over again when your visa expires. So this is important to know. And then, well, language barriers, processing delays. We have especially this problem in France. The French prefecture, they don't speak English. Usually it's very difficult to find an English speaker, and the delays can get very important. So it's good also to seek advice, so you know, and you're reassured as well. You don't think that there's an issue with your application, but just that it's on track. So that's something important to know. Yes, I'm here, of course, with the other panelists. If you have any questions, I didn't want to drown all of you under very difficult visas and too much information, but I am happy to answer all your questions, and do not hesitate to reach out to me or Lexidy if you have, if you wish a more in-depth consultation. We offer a first free of charge consultation with all of our clients.
Great, thank you, Eleanor. Right, well, let's go to some questions for you. There's one in the Q&A box right now. Let me have a look, a couple actually. Right, Tony says, how do you show income if you're not allowed to work in France? I assume he's talking about the visitor visa there.
Yes, well, it's not necessarily income, but it can also be savings or proof of funds. So many things are acceptable. It's really a matter of presenting it in a good way and in a way that the consulate or the French administration likes to see it. But we do also have some persons that are employees under the visitor visa. It's not. It's always a hot topic. So with these situations, it's very important to be careful on how you present the application, and what are the taxes implications and social implications as well.
Yeah, and that's obviously something Debbie will be talking about later on, so do stick around for her presentation. Right, Dave and Sue say, I'm not quite sure I understand this question, but we'll give it a go. They say, we propose to go to France in October on a 12-month visitor visa without the residency option for the first year. Not quite sure what they mean by that, as we can use our GHIC card for healthcare. Then once our house is sold and purchased a French house, we will return to the UK to apply for the residency visa. Do we have to wait for the first visitor visa to expire before applying for the residency visa? So there's a few different questions.
Yeah.
And I can see Helen already sort of putting her hand up on the healthcare aspect. So maybe let's just start, Eleanor, maybe you could explain just a little bit about that residency process. I think that would help them understand.
Of course. So the long stay visa is a French residency permit. It does not look the same because it's not a physical card, it's a stamp on your passport, but it has the same legal validity of a residency permit. So that's the first thing to know. If you want to apply for a 12-month visa and then reapply, I would really, really advise you to apply for the renewable visa. So then you can renew it very easily from France. Regarding the health card, I will leave it to Helen, but what I do for our British customers, I don't know if it's the same thing because I'm really not familiar with the British system, but we can provide the NH1 which is a document that British retirees, if I understood well, can have. And last but not least, in any case, if you have a visa and then you want to apply to another visa type, it's possible, it's feasible, if it's can answer your question.
Okay. Helen, do you want to jump in on this one? I know that we're going to come to you next anyway, but maybe you want to just preface.
Yeah, I know. I was just because it did flag up for me, which is I think they were referring to the difference between the VLS and the VLSTS when they were talking about the two visas.
Yeah.
And I think VLS, yes, you would then have to go back and renew in the UK in your country of origin, whereas the VLSTS you can renew in France. And I think, as Eleanor said, that I think it would be better if you anticipate wanting to stay to have the visa that can be renewable in France once you're there. The EHIC, which is the European Healthcare Card, can't be used for a 12-month visa application, whether it's a VLS or a VLSTS. And I will discuss that more in my presentation about what you can do for the different types. So I probably won't go over it again now.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so stick around for Helen's presentation. She's coming up next. Right, let's just have one more from Eleanor whilst we're with you, and then we'll move on. Let's see. Anne says, "I'm French and my husband is English. We want to relocate to Brittany and set up a micro company. I suppose that's a micro entrepreneur company together. What visa will he need?" So that's an English person moving with a French person who wants to work in France.
Okay, the very first step is checking if your marriage has been registered in the French civil record. So this is the case if you have been married in France, so that's automatic. If you've gotten married abroad, it's really necessary to register it in the French civil record. So then he can apply for a visa as a spouse of a French citizen or directly a residency permit in France. And in this case, he will have the right to work without having to apply for any work authorization. If you didn't get your marriage registered, this takes a very long time if you don't do it in advance before the marriage. So in this case, I would suggest applying for the entrepreneur in the meantime. And as soon as you get your marriage registered, then we can switch to spouse of French, which is a much better residency permit to have.
Okay, great. Right, Dave, just a quick follow-up from Dave and Sue, who had that previous question. They said, we only have a place to stay with friends for 5 months, so we can't show the address. So maybe they are limited to just having that 6 month. But yeah, this is something that you should probably have a good think about, Dave and Sue, as your long-term plan on that in terms of what's going to be better, because you'll be limited, I suppose, on that temporary visa. Right, okay, let's go over to our next speaker now, and we'll cover all those questions on healthcare. So this is Helen from Agence AXA International, focusing on French healthcare. Over to you, Helen.
Thank you very much, Zoe. I'm going to talk today about healthcare in France, and kind of also from before you even start to think about coming to France to when you live here, and just a very quick 10-minute whistle-stop tour of the French healthcare system. I'm here with two hats on, really. I work for AXA, Agence AXA International, and we are an English-speaking AXA agency in France. We do all your French-based insurances for you. We're a 10-strong team, all native English speakers, most of us who've relocated, so we've all been through that journey. And then I also work with Lonemi, which is our sister company, which we use for looking at the insurance you need when you're first coming to France, because it's a little bit different, and there's quite a lot of options available. So very whistle-stop tour again, as with Eleanor, and just to kind of give you an idea of the questions you need to think about, really. The first thing you need to do is think about what insurance you need coming to France. If you're applying for a visa, or you need to apply for a visa, you will need a visa compliant private health insurance. Now, there are 3 main pillars for that. It must have a minimum of 30,000 euros worth of cover. It must include repatriation, and it must be valid for the 365 days of the 1-year visa that you are applying for. And they're the main core principles. Within that, there are lots of different options, all of which will be compliant for the visa, but which will give you varying amounts of cover. And we would recommend that, we have a personal consultation just to see what suits you best. Then we're going to submit that insurance to the French consulate along with our application. Now, it's worth mentioning here a couple of the other different situations that people may be in. If you have EU citizenship and you don't need a visa, or if you're married to an EU citizen and you're coming straight to France, or even if you're French and you've lived outside of France for, most of your life and you're going back to France, you don't need a visa, and there will be kind of shorter process towards getting your social security registration in France, but you will still need some insurance when you first arrive in France. You're legally obliged to have an insurance in place, and in many cases there is a 3-month waiting period before you can apply for a social security number. So you don't necessarily need the same insurance as for a visa application, but you do need something in place. I would also say, even if you're applying for a auto entrepreneur visa or a talent visa, technically, you can be covered from the French system from the minute you arrive, but as Eleanor mentioned, the wheels of French bureaucracy can turn slowly, and it may be some time before you get your social security registration. And so I would recommend that you have something in place, at least for accidents and emergencies. The other option you have, which we've referred to earlier, is what we call the S1, and this is a transfer of your benefits. If you've worked in any EU country and you are of state retirement age in that country, then you can apply for a form called an S1. And if you're in the UK, that's going to be from HMRC or DWP Overseas Healthcare Team. And then this can be used for your visa application to cover your healthcare obligation, and also allows you to apply for your social security as soon as you arrive in France. Again, everything moves slowly, and you're moving to a new country, there's going to be a lot going on. So again, I would always recommend people have something in place as a bare minimum for accidents and emergencies for at least the first 6 months. Preferably, I would say, for the first year, but it's worth having that conversation to see what you need. When you get to France, as we say, you've got your insurance, you've got your visa granted, you're here. You can then, depending on your circumstances, start the process of registering with the French authorities for a social security number. And I'll discuss that a little bit later on, but again, it can take some time. And they may even ask sometimes to see that you've got insurance in place while you're waiting. And certainly if you're registering as in the prefecture, they will look for 12 months of insurance while you're waiting. So if you're married to an EU citizen, for example, you need to apply for your titre de séjour at the prefecture. They will want to see some insurance, and you'll need all of that in place before you can apply for your social security number. So it's always a little bit one thing follows another. I say, if you're eligible, and everybody should be, because there is a piece of legislation in France known as PUMA, which is not an office or a physical place. It's a piece of legislation, and this states that everybody who is living legally and stably in France for at least 3 months is entitled to care from the social security system, and then you can apply. So worst case scenario, if you're early retired, then you'll have to wait 3 months before you can apply for a social security number. Legally, so looking at those conditions, legally means that you have a valid residency permit, either a visa or a titre de séjour or an EU passport. And stably means that you have the financial resources to support yourself while you're here. So in lots of ways, similar to the visa application itself. And what comes after that? Well, then we move into kind of my axe ahead, and we start looking at the French social security system. So after 3 months, as we've said, of legal stable residency, you can send your application to your local CPAM office. CPAM is the Caisse Primaire Assurance Maladie, and there is an office in every department in the main prefecture town and some smaller satellite offices, and they will process your application. And after that, they will deal with all the administration of your reimbursements and requests and all that kind of thing. Once you've filed for your legal for your social security number, you can start to keep any receipts that you get for your healthcare. These are known as a fait de soins. It's an A4 brown form. And you can start to keep those. And once you're awarded a social security number, you may well be able to claim quite a lot of those expenses back. Now, we've said 6 to 8 weeks for a temporary number. I think realistically 4 to 12 months is a better time frame for people to consider when you're waiting for all that information to come back realistically. And I do tend to see more people going straight to a permanent number, but it taking a little bit longer than being given a temporary number and then subsequently kind of having that afterwards. The quickest I've seen somebody receive their social security number is 6 weeks. Actually, I have seen it happen, but it was very rare, and it was a really, really well put together file when they applied, and it was an EU citizen, and it was excellently done. I think realistically, 4 to 6 months is not, it is doing well, in my opinion, if you get that back. Once you've got a social security number, either temporary or permanent, you can add that to all of the fait de soins, the brown forms that you may have had for healthcare expenses, and you can send those off to get some reimbursements back from CPAM. The final step in all of this is you'll receive the carte vitale. Now, if you're researching France, I'm sure you've heard about the carte vitale, and it does very much feel like a champagne cork popping moment when that card arrives in the post. And it's not, what's actually more important is getting awarded your social security number, because that's when your cover becomes valid. But the carte vitale is, make no bones about it, is great to receive, and it helps automate the system, and it will make everything flow much more smoothly. Very, very quickly, just to cover the French healthcare system, because it probably will be very different to what you're used to, regardless of where you're coming from. The French health system is not free at point of access, although there are some exceptions. You will generally be expected to pay upfront for your care and then be refunded afterwards. And as I say, this is automated by the use of your carte vitale. The state have a series of reference costs associated with all of the treatments that they will reimburse, and then they reimburse a percentage of that. Now, generally, that would be around 70% that they'll reimburse. Can be between 60 and 80, or as low as 0, or as high as 100. It's not a particularly straightforward system, but I think if you have in your mind that generally you'll get about 70% back, that's not a bad rule of thumb. To further complicate matters, doctors can charge more than that reference figure as well. And particularly, you'll see this in areas for consultants where they're very highly regarded, very experienced, very sought after. And there are other areas, in particular dental treatment, where the real costs are way in excess of the set cost by the government. And so what you then have is a complementary insurance known as complementary health insurance, or a mutuelle. And that's where we come in as an insurer, and we can look at that with you, because there are masses and masses of options, from something which will support you in the case of going into hospital alone, right through to giving you support across the board for inpatient treatment, outpatient treatment, hospital private rooms, complementary therapies, dental, optical. There's a huge range, and these have a series of percentages related with them. So you can get higher care to cover these doctors and etc. who charge above the reference figures. It is complicated, and circumstances will be different for everybody. And I do recommend that, whatever you do, have a conversation with a professional who knows the system well, who can look at your needs and what you need, because there is a huge range of mutuelles available, but you don't necessarily need something very expensive and top end. You just need something that's going to give you peace of mind in case of big costs, in my opinion. It's a whistle-stop tour of the French health system, and then hopefully all of you who are in your early journey, it just gives you some idea of the things you need to think about as you're kind of making your plans and moving forward. And if you need to get in touch, our websites are here. Feel free to get in touch at any time. You can have a chat with me or one of my colleagues, and we can go through the options with you.
Thank you, Helen. And actually, if you are a FrenchEntrée member, I recently recorded a new masterclass on French healthcare with Helen, where we really go into detail on the healthcare system and mutuelles and all of that. There's lots of advice and tips in there, so do go, look out for that. It'll be up in the next week or so. Right, let's go to a few questions from Helen. I noticed a few in the question box, so I'll go there first. If you have put questions in there for Eleanor, don't worry, we'll come back to her at the end as well, but I'll just stay with Helen for now. Right, so back to Dave and Sue. They say, Helen, in our circumstances, we are retired, so can we use an S1 for the visa?
You can, and it's a really valuable tool, I would say. There's just a few cautions I would give about it. So you have to be state pension age, and then you can apply for the S1. And if you have a partner who is not yet, or if you're married, so you must be married. But if you're married and your spouse is not yet of pensionable age, they can what we call piggyback on your S1, and they can also apply for a version. And that can be used for the 12-month visa. Just my only caution is it's to be used for people who are coming to France to live, and it will be registered with the French system. If you try and renew a visa using the S1, the French government will want to know why it has not been registered, because it's intended to transfer your healthcare to your new place of residence. So if you're having a 12-month visa just because you want to travel around, then it's not a suitable option. It's for people coming to live and be resident in France.
Okay,
I hope that makes sense.
Okay, Anne says, look, oh, this is an interesting one, actually. So I'm assuming Anne is French, or had previously lived in France, at least. She says, I have a social security number from my youth, but I haven't used it in 30 plus years, and I haven't paid into the system. Are there things that I will need to do for it to work?
In lots of ways, it's no different, but it just might make things a little bit easier. So when you'll still have to wait for 3 months. And I've friends here who are French, who've left the country to study and been away and then come back and been through this. So they've had to wait 3 months in order to reactivate their social security. And then if you're not working, again, you apply under the provision of Puma. Although if you're French, I think you can probably apply straight away. However,
you might not have that
you still have to wait 3 months. No, you still have to wait 3 months. My friend had to wait 3 months. You still have to wait 3 months, but you're not going to have to jump through the same amount of hoops because you are French. You've got that registration and your file is already created in the system. What can take so long for people coming to France who've never lived here? You almost have to have a birth certificate and are created as a person from scratch in the French system, and that's what takes the time as they kind of go through this. I don't think we'll touch on it today, but and we touched on it in the longer discussion, which is you have to look at your birth name. They need to see what name you were born with and see the progression of your name and all this kind of stuff. And that's quite important. I think probably for a visa application, the same as is for social security, and that's what takes the time. So if you already had a French social security number, it's likely you're still there in their systems, and they'll find you and they'll resurrect it and they'll reissue it.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, yeah, Anne confirms, yes, she is French. Okay, so we answered that correctly. Yeah. Okay, let's have one more from Helen. I've got a few that people have sent in, so let me just find them. Okay, I think this is quite a common one, actually. I've heard that private healthcare doesn't exist in France. Is this true? Could you explain a little bit about the French system in regards to that?
Yeah, it's different. I think it's not the same. It's not as you would know it in the UK, where you have either fully NHS or fully private, and the same for the US. It's not the same. There's kind of an amalgamation of public hospitals, private clinics, semi-private clinics, conventionné, non-conventionné. You have the choice to go wherever you choose. You can go and see. And even within that, you'll find doctors who are within private clinics who charge the kind of set rates. And I have had, my kids have had treatment in public hospitals where they've had what we call a dépassement des honoraires because somebody's a particular type of specialist, although that's more rare, but it does happen. You can go anywhere. There's not the same delineation between public and private. It's more of a mix, and there is some onus on you to do some research about the doctors and the hospitals you go to check their status and to check what costs you might be liable for. And it is a little bit of so I call it a grey area. It's it's not as clear as I would like for people. So there are both things, but there's no, you have to have a private insurance to go to the private clinics. Everybody has the same kind of cover and anybody can go anywhere. What mutual level you have is down to you. And then you can choose your doctor. And if you're not happy, you can also move from one doctor to another. And I mean, I've done that as well.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And I think that's good advice across the board when moving to France, is to really take the time to understand the French system and talk to people like, you know, like all our panelists today who do understand the French system, rather than
there is,
like the English.
I was going to say, there is a lot of exactly, it's so different. And there's a lot of information available on the internet, but you need a kind of certain level of base knowledge to understand the terminology that they're using.
Yeah.
Most hospitals will have their website. Doctors are often listed on websites of doctors such as Dr. Lib, and you can get the information about what regime they practice under and what their charges are. So, but you've got to have a kind of base level of what you're looking for before you start that.
Yeah, good advice. Okay, right, we will come back to Helen at the end.
No problem.
So keep them coming if you do have any. Let's go over to our next speaker now, which is our very own FrenchEntrée property and relocation advisor, Debbie, who's going to be talking about French taxes. Over to you, Debbie.
Thanks, Zoe. Hello, everybody. I'm Debbie Nye, property and relocation advisor at FrenchEntrée members. I also run my own tax consultancy company in the French Alps. And I've been working in France for over 30 years. So I have a lot of experience of living in France, working in France, and helping other people come to France. So we're going to be talking about French taxation as residents. If we can just have a look at the next slide, I'll give you a basic idea of the main taxes that we have in France. So we have income tax, which is going to be a tax on your earnings and savings. We have healthcare and social security contributions, which goes in line with what Helen's been talking about. And then we have something called social taxes, which we don't have in the UK. These are an annex tax to income tax, but they are only applied to certain categories of income: investment income, rental income, and sometimes on your pension income. I'm going to come to that in more detail in a moment. So if we have a look now at income tax, this is giving you an idea of the progressive scale of income tax that we have in France. The first thing to know about France is that when you are a married couple or in a civil partnership, you have a household tax return in France rather than an individual self-assessment. So we look at the household, we see whether it's made up of one person, two adults, maybe children, and each adult has a full share, which is known as a part fiscale, and each children has a half share. Until you have 3 children, then you get an extra half share. So the reason this is important is because the sliding scale that we can see in front of us is per household share. Okay, and that means that if you were a single person living in France, you could earn up to just under 11,500 euros and not pay any tax. And then if you earned more than that, it's the next tranche, the next band, if you like, that kicks in, but on a progressive scale. So you won't fall into the 30% tax band just because you're earning 50,000 euros. You won't be taxed 30% on all of it. It's a progressive scale. Okay. The other thing to know about is that if you are a very high income earner, there is an additional tax. It's called an exceptional contribution. I've only given a brief example here, but it's really for people whose income exceeds 250k for a single person and 500k for a married or paxed couple. Pax is a civil partnership. And you only pay the extra percentage on the in excess of that figure. So it's very high income earners, but it's important to know that that exists. On the other side of the scale, if you're a very modest income earner and you'll just tip above one of the tax bands, then the French apply what they call a décote, which is a reduction allowing you to come down either into the tax band below or to not pay tax. So that can be quite helpful. And that will depend on your circumstances, how many people there are in the household. One other thing to remember with French income tax is that when you come to live in France, we are going to declare your worldwide income in France. So the whole income will be declared in France, even if it was earned in another country. And then we're going to look at which categories of income are taxable in France and which ones have a tax credit applied to them. So, for example, all rental income is taxable in the country where the property is located. All professional income is taxable in the country where you physically carry out the activity. And this is really important, which is something to do with the entrepreneur visa that we mentioned earlier. You have to be registered in France if you are carrying out your activity in France. I'll come to that a little bit later on. But if you did have a professional activity, if you kept a salaried employment in the UK and you traveled back to the UK at the beginning of every week and you carried out your activity in the UK and came back to see your family in France, you would still be considered as French tax resident, but we would declare your salary in France and apply a tax credit to cancel out the French tax on that part of the income. The same with the rental income. We're going to talk about pensions a little bit later, because there's a specific agreement with regards to pensions. So I'll talk about that a little bit later on. So if we can have the next screen. So the other thing that we have in France, in addition to income tax, is obviously the social security contributions. As Helen's been telling us, there are various ways of getting into the healthcare system. But one way or another, unless you have the S1 certificate, which is a bilateral social security certificate enabling you to transfer your rights to France, and therefore the UK is effectively reimbursing France for that share of your medical expenses, not the mutual part, but the base healthcare cover. So unless you have that, then you are going to be contributing into French healthcare. And this is done in various ways, either through your professional income. You can see here that I've indicated you could be salaried salaried employment in France, self-employment, running your own business in France. They're the two main ways that you would contribute when you're working in France. If you're not working in France, and if you're not of pension age and you don't have your S1 certificate, then the PUMA that Helen mentioned earlier, which gives you the right to have healthcare in France, you would need to contribute according to your asset income. So it's quite a complex calculation, but basically, if you have more than 11,497 euros of asset income, which is investment income or rental income, then the amount above that figure, they calculate a social security contribution of 6.5%. And this is, they call it an additional contribution to healthcare. But of course, if you have not paid in any other way, then it will be your base healthcare contribution. And that will depend on individual situation. And that, for the PUMA, it is per person. Okay. I've done a little table here to try and explain the percentage of social security contributions, but I have to just put a little caveat that in France, as I think everyone said so far, it's one of these countries where they make everything very complex. It's not just a fixed rate of 10% or 15% or 25%. It varies according to all kinds of things. It can vary as a salaried employee according to the type of activity you have in your convention collective, which is your works convention, whether you are a cadre, which is a director, manager level, or whether you are a basic employee. When you're self-employed, it's going to depend on the type of activity, the type of business structure you have, the type of tax regime that you choose. So the figures that I've given here, I've put approximate. It's really to give you a guideline. And please also be aware, France is one of these countries that likes to change everything. Maybe once a year, maybe when the new president comes in, maybe when they decide to have 4 different prime ministers. But, you know, keep an eye on the FrenchEntrée website, which is a very, very good source of information of all the changes that might happen in France. But basically here we've got, if you were a salaried employee in France under a French contract, although it costs the employer a lot more than it does in the UK, for example, your share of the social security contributions are around 25% of your gross salary. The employer has to pay rather a lot more on top of that, I can tell you. It's very difficult to convince someone to continue paying your salary if you move to France and you have to have a French employment contract. They try and find a different way around it. One of those ways around it is perhaps being self-employed, although you have to have more than one client when you're self-employed. So you can't just work for your previous employer and not work for anyone else. So it's not as easy as it sounds, not as a self-employed person. Self-employment in France, again, it's quite complex. We break it down into two main categories of tax regime. One is called Réel, which is the profit and loss regime that you have in the UK. I earned 100K, I spent 80K, I've got 20K profit. It's around 45% of that profit that we calculate the social security contributions on. Most of them, about 90% of them, are then offset in the profit and loss accounts because they are a deductible expense. But there's always a little thing called CSG, a little cotisation that we pay in France that's never tax deductible. So you can't deduct every single thing that you spend in social security. But on the profit and loss regime, you offset most of your social security to get the net profit. And on the net profit, you pay income tax, which was my previous slide. The other regime that we have in France is a micro regime. In this particular table, I've just put the micro entrepreneur because everyone talks about this regime. But micro is a regime in itself. It's a tax regime in itself. It's a simplified regime where you don't have to have an accountant, you don't do profit and loss accounts, and you pay your social security contributions and your income tax on a fixed profit instead of deducting your true costs. And the micro entrepreneur is a pay-as-you-earn version of the micro tax regime. So instead of paying 45% of fixed profit, we're paying a fixed rate on the gross. And so I've broken this down into the categories, the main categories that we have. We have micro entrepreneurs who sell items. So this could be an antiques dealer who's selling antiques, or it could be a builder who's selling some materials, but also carrying out the installation himself. So we have around 12.4% currently on the gross sales. We have commercial and artisanal services, and we have around 21.5% of gross in social security contributions. This is not income tax. This is just social security. And then we have what we call BNC, which is non-commercial services, and that's things like consultants, teachers, ski instructors, and that is a much higher rate, and that's 24.8% currently, due to go up to 26.1% in January next year. And those differences are, there are several reasons for those, but the main one for sales is that you've had a higher cost, obviously, at buying the product that you're selling on. And with the services, there are just different contributions to pensions and things like that, which make one higher than the other. And then with the Puma contributions that I mentioned earlier, I've just put that in the table as well. Okay, so then the last thing that we need to think about is that in addition to income tax and social security, although there is a slight explanation to make, but in addition to income tax, we have something called social taxes. You will see these written as social charges. Zoe will tell you that I get a bit upset about this because for me, social charges are social security contributions, and prélèvements sociaux, which has that word social in it, it's another tax. It's attached to income tax. It's an annex to income tax. So I call them social taxes just to try and distinguish. These are only applied to the following income. They're applied to investment income of all type. What does that mean? Bank interest, dividends, capital gains from stocks and shares, for example. Assurance vie, which is a special investment vehicle in France, the gains from that. Rental income. Now, this is rental income in France because we get a tax credit, remember, for any income on UK rental income. And then we have foreign pensions. Now, you're only going to pay social taxes on foreign pensions if you are affiliated to the French Social Security as an obligation. So if you are of pension age and you have obtained an S1 certificate and you are not at the same time carrying out a professional activity in France, so you don't come over here, yes, I'm retired, but I still want to be a consultant. All right. So if you don't have any other professional activity and you have the S1, then you will not pay social taxes. See, got me into it. Social taxes on your foreign pensions. But if you don't have the S1, and you're obliged, therefore, to have French medical insurance, or if you are working in France, then you will be obliged to pay these additional social taxes on your foreign pensions. Now, I've given another table here just to give you an idea. The social taxes are currently at 17.2% as a standard rate. This is for all French residents and all non-EU residents, except that the UK managed to maintain its agreement after Brexit. And if you are affiliated to the UK National Insurance, or you have your S1 certificate, sorry, this is for the investment income, then you can get the reduced rate of 7.5% social taxes applied to your investment income rather than the 17.2%. And the same thing for French rental income, as long as it's not a professional rental income. I'm not going to go into too much detail. I'm not going to go into detail about rental activities today because it's very complex. We'll do that in another webinar, won't we, Zoe? But there is a distinction there. It has to be a non-professional rental income for you to pay social taxes. With regards to the foreign pensions, we're not looking at the 17.2% rate. We're looking at a maximum of 9.1%. And this could be a reduced rate according to your income from the 2 years previously. Again, if you want to find out more about that, it's best to have a discussion with a tax specialist or an accountant, depending on what you're wanting to do in France. The last column, just to explain what that last column is, when you pay social taxes in France 1 year, you're entitled to offset a certain percentage from your income, not from the tax, but from your income the following year. So if you did have investment income and you paid social taxes at 17.2%, you would get 5.6% reduction in your investment income the following year. It's like it's actually a tax reduction called the CSG, déductible. On rental income, it's 6.8%. And on the foreign pensions, according to the rate, you can see it starts at 5.9 for the higher rate, 3.8 for the middle rate, and 3.8 again for the lower rate. Just to explain that on the pension side of it, it's not a tax credit. It actually reduces your pension income. So if you had 20,000 euros 1 year and you paid your 9.1%, and the following year you have 22,000 euros, we're going to work out 5.9% of the 22,000 euros, and we're going to offset that to reduce the pension income back down to nearer the 20,000, and then it'll be social tax again at 9.1%, and so on. So they're kind of taking a social tax from you, but saying, we'll give you some of it back the next year to reduce your income for your income tax purposes. So a very complex system in France. Difficult to explain in a short period of time, but hopefully that gives you some kind of insight. Then we're going to look at pensions, because I assume some of you might be thinking of retiring to France. I did include a little caveat about US pensions, but we're concentrating mainly on UK pensions today. So we're going to look at the general rules of pensions. We're going to look at the difference between private and government service pensions, and then lump sum pensions, and then how to claim back if you've had to pay tax in both countries in your first year of coming to France. So first of all, if we can look at the pensions, you need to know that once you come and live in France, all income has to be declared on the French tax return, as I mentioned right at the beginning. All private pensions are taxable in the country of residence, so they're taxable in France, and this includes the state pension. It's considered as a private pension in France. The only pensions that remain taxable in the country of origin are public service pensions, so military, civil service, teachers' pensions, and police. Be careful with NHS. Just because you work for the NHS does not make it a public service pension, I'm afraid. It depends who pays the pension. If it's paid by the local authority, it's a public service pension. If it's paid by paymaster, it's a private pension and taxable in France. You're only going to pay tax in one country, thanks to the double tax agreement, but it's important to know that the majority of your pensions will be taxable in France. Pensions are taxed on the progressive scale. You're given a 10% tax-free allowance, but that's capped quite low at about €4,300 per household. So if two of you have pensions, that is spread across the two pensions and then taxed on the sliding scale. If you do have the public service pensions, they still have to be declared. And then we apply a tax credit to cancel out the French tax that would have been due on that part of your income. With regards to lump sum pensions, there's always some confusion with UK clients because you are used to having a 25% lump sum tax-free available to you when you first look at taking your pensions. What you have to remember is if you are already resident in France at the time you're ready to take your pensions, you will not be taxed in the UK on your private pensions. So you're not going to get a 25% lump sum tax-free in the UK. It's going to be under the French rules. And in order to get the fixed rate, I won't call it a reduced rate because it depends on the amount of your pension, but the fixed rate of 7.5% on 90%, because you get that 10% tax-free allowance, is only applied if you fulfill two cumulative criteria. The first one is that you have to arrange to take 100% of your pension pot. Now, you might have several pension pots, so this will apply to them individually, but you can't just take 25% and call it a lump sum. That doesn't work in France. If you take 25%, you have to start taking the rest of it at the same time in your monthly payments or an annuity. But you either take 100% or you take a lower percentage plus the monthly payments at the same time. So that's the first rule. You have to organise to take the pension all at once. If you leave a percentage in your pension pot and take it in 2 years' time, it will be taxed on the progressive scale. And the second criteria is that whilst you were paying your pension contributions, they had to either be tax deductible or tax-free at the time they were paid. I believe that most private pension contributions are tax deductible in the UK, but you would need to double check that with your pension provider. Yes, so I think I mentioned it earlier. Don't forget the additional social taxes that would be due. So if you wanted to take a lump sum pension, for example, and you don't have your S1 certificate or you are still working at the same time in France, be careful. You will also have 9.1% social taxes to pay on your pension, and that is on the full amount of the pension. Okay. I think that was the main thing with regards to pensions. And then I quickly, have I got time, Zoe, or not, to do the
yeah, we are running a little bit tight on time.
Okay.
So
well, don't worry, it was just about working in France, but maybe we'll see if anyone has any questions on that.
Yeah, let's go to some questions. And what we'll do is this webinar is being recorded and we'll add the full presentation to the recording so that when you go back and watch it, you'll be able to catch those extra slides. Also, I will mention Debbie has also recorded a series of tax masterclasses for FrenchEntrée members where she does a deep dive on various different tax subjects. Because as you can see, it is quite complicated, but thank you for trying your best to simplify it. Right, let's do a couple of questions for Debbie, and then I will, if it's okay with everybody to just run over a few minutes, I'll try and race through a few of these last questions, but we won't keep everyone too long. I know most of you are probably on your lunch hours. Right, one here for Debbie. If I move to France mid-year, do I pay tax for that whole year or just from my arrival date?
That's a very good question. So the year that you moved to France, we only look at the income earned from the date that you arrived to the 31st of December. We have a January to December tax year in France. So we just look at that income. You declare that you arrived on the 5th of May, and you have to declare the income that you actually received between the 5th of May and the 31st of December in your first tax return.
Okay, that makes sense. Right, this is more of a UK tax question, actually, so we'll see if you know the answer or not. Do I still need to file a tax return in my home country, so the UK, after becoming tax resident in France?
Okay, so I know a little bit about that, but I am not a UK specialist. So this will depend on whether you have income in the UK. So if you have rental income in the UK and you come to live in France, although you have to declare that income in France, you still have to declare it on your UK self-assessment. And if you have any kind of income in the UK, I think you would still need to make a UK self-assessment, and you have to declare the worldwide income in France and just the income earned in the UK on the UK self-assessment, as far as I'm aware. But please double check that with a UK tax advisor.
Great. Right. Let's jump back to the Q&A box and I'll make sure we've answered everyone's questions there. Right. It looks like this is a visa one. So for Eleanor, Richard says, I have a 10-year carte de séjour under Article 50 of the withdrawal agreement. So that's the post-Brexit carte de séjour. He says, can I obtain a carte de séjour for my wife with this, even though we were only married on the 4th of August 2023, so after Brexit? We had been partners since 2018, but I'm not sure that we can prove that. That's an interesting one.
Yeah, no, there is definitely something to do as long as you can prove that you have been living under the same roof for the last year, even though you got married before. There is a special residency for a spouse of people that already have a residency permit in France. But I think that it would be interesting to have a deeper consultation here.
Yeah, okay. So that might be a good one to take Eleanor up on that option of the free first consultation and see if they can help you with that. Okay, Anne says, this looks like it's one for Helen. Do you have any recommendations for moving into medical desert areas? So maybe we'll just explain what that is first.
Yeah, it's a concern, I think, that France has many of the same problems as health services in all countries, and there are areas of France where it's very difficult to access general doctor, and also you may be a long way away from the major services. And I would say think seriously about that, to be honest. France are working, I know, to try and bring availability to those areas, and there is really good availability of teleconsultation where you can do that by video. My pharmacy has a video consultation booth which can check your blood pressure and all sorts of things. These are great, but it is an issue. Think about if you have to have surgery, where would you go? Where would your hospital be? Are you happy with that? And are you happy with the journey? I think it is something that people really need to think about.
Yeah, that's good advice.
No easy answer to that one.
Okay, this Maria's just popped one in the question box. This one looks like it's for Eleanor as well. I have a question regarding the visitor visa. How can a foreigner rent an apartment for a year in France without having a French residency permit? This is a bit of one of those catch-22 situations, isn't it?
Well, first of all, renting and being legal in France are two separate things. A rental contract is an agreement between two individuals, and it could be valid also if one doesn't have a residency permit. But then you do not need to rent a full year to have your visitor visa. We can perfectly have more short-term rentals or even someone hosting you in order to get a full year renewable visitor visa. It's not a condition to rent something for a year.
Okay, so there are some other options.
Yes, a lot.
Okay, great. Right, this is a question that I think is equally for Helen and Eleanor. Combined your name there for Eleanor. How does it work for young children and teenagers moving to France? Do they need their own visa and their own healthcare? So let's start with Eleanor with the visa.
Yeah, for the visa application, they do need their own visa if they travel with their parents. And they will have a visitor visa for children. And then when they are in France, they apply for a special document de circulation. It's like a residency permit for minors. And this is done online at the French prefecture upon their arrival.
Great, that makes sense. And Helen, what about for healthcare?
And yes, everybody who's having their visa and everybody who's living in France needs health insurance in their own right. When they're in France, they can apply by being linked to one of the parents if one of them's working or whatever, they can be linked to their parents and apply for their social security number that way. But for the visa and for coming to France, they will need their own policy.
Okay, that's good to know. Right, let's have one last question. This is actually a question for all three of you. I'm planning to move to France and work remotely for a UK company. How does that affect my visa, taxes, and healthcare access? Now, I know this is quite a big subject, but maybe let's just touch on the key things that they need to know, or perhaps the key things that they can't do, because I know this is quite a common question. Let's start with Eleanor, because that's the visa is probably the first question.
Wow, that's really the questions that I am avoiding to answer. So it really depends on your working contract and your situation. With the visitor visa, you have to sign a document saying that you're not going to be working in France. It's interpreted in the sense that you cannot have links with the French labor market. So if you work remotely, it could be accepted, but there are some social and taxes implication, and it also depends on the consulate. We have very different readings of this rule from the consulates in the US and in the UK. So we really need to be prepared and have a strategy if you want to apply for the visitor visa. I leave the floor to the other ones.
Yeah, well, let's go to Debbie, because I am sure she has something to say on this one as our tax specialist.
Well, the problem we have in France, sometimes laws can be a bit contradictory. So there's an immigration law which enables people to work remotely if they're not working for French businesses. And yet the tax law says that if you are physically working in France, you need to be registered in France and pay income tax and social security on that working revenue. So it's very difficult, I imagine, for anyone to understand how they can accept this. But when you'll ask your immigration specialist a question, and they might be able to obtain a visa to enable you to work. But I would, if you then came to me for tax, I would say you need to do a tax return. You're going to have to declare that income in France, and you cannot work for a UK company whilst you are living in France. You have to have a French contract. Your UK employer can become a foreign employer, but they would have to pay French social security contributions. You'd have to have a French employment contract. It can be written in English, but it has to follow the French employment laws, which is actually much better protection for you as a French employee, I would have to say, but it would cost them a lot more than it would in the UK. And if you were going to be self-employed, you would need to be self-employed in France.
Yeah, and you also mentioned it earlier, didn't you, Debbie? If you were going to, for example, become a freelancer and work freelance for your old company, you'd have to work for other companies as well.
You have to have at least one or two, preferably two other clients. I mean, they can be relatively small clients in comparison. You know, if you're doing consultancy, you can do a couple of extra consultations a year to other people, but you can't be seen as working for one employer because it's a disguised salary. The same as it is in any other country, to be honest. I think it's called IR35 in the UK.
Yeah. Well, I know, as Eleanor said, this is the question nobody wants to answer because it's so tricky. But I'm glad that we are touching on it today, because it is a question that comes up, and at least we're highlighting those potential problems there. Helen, is there anything to add from a healthcare or social security?
Not really. And probably of the three, it's easiest for me to answer it because I don't have to wade into the tax or the visa elements of it. It really, from my point of view, it's handled depending on how it's handled by the tax and the visa. So if your company put you on a French contract, then we can find you a company like a mutuelle as an employee, or a personal mutuelle, as long as you're within the French social security. If you stay outside of French social security, then there are some kind of private insurances you can have instead. But from my point of view, it's easier to deal with.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think the best advice that we can offer in that situation is really to speak to some experts and really explore all the options and take into account all of the different aspects of it, not only speaking to a visa expert, but also a tax expert and anything else that you need to get that advice. Right. We have gone over a little bit, so I'm sorry for that. I will wrap it up quickly now. Thank you so much to all of you who attended today. And thank you once more to our panel for giving up their time and answering all your questions. If we didn't get around to your questions, or you have more questions, you can put them on the comments on our YouTube videos, and we'll also make sure that we forward them on to the relevant panelists. And if you want to get in touch with any of today's panelists, you can also email us at webinar@FrenchEntrée.com. If you enjoyed today's webinar, keep an eye out for more FrenchEntrée webinars over the coming months. And remember, if you want to discuss your personal situation with one of our FrenchEntrée property and relocation advisors, such as Debbie, you can also become a FrenchEntrée member. Go to FrenchEntrée.com/members for more on that. Okay, thank you one more time to everyone, and I'll hopefully see you all on the next webinar. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.